You know that feeling when you are trying to learn something new, something really complex, and you just hit a wall?
Oh, yeah. The classic plateau. Everyone hits it eventually.
Right, exactly. You are cruising along, you are making all this great progress, and then suddenly you hit this massive, just completely unavoidable plateau. And it happens to all of us.
It really does. It doesn't matter what the skill is.
Yeah, whether you are trying to master like a coding language or playing an instrument, or in the specific case we were looking at today, an actual spoken language.
And it's incredibly frustrating.
It is, because you are sitting there, staring at a textbook or watching a tutorial or flipping through a giant stack of flashcards, and it just feels hopelessly inadequate.
You've got the raw data, but it's not clicking.
Exactly. I mean, you know the words, you know the grammatical rules, but the actual mastery, the fluidity, that ability to just effortlessly inhabit that skill in real time, it's completely out of reach.
It feels like your brain is just full, like it has reached its absolute capacity for new information.
Yeah, you literally feel like you can't cram another thing in there.
Yeah.
But what if the reason you can't push past that plateau isn't your brain at all? What if the actual problem is the room you were sitting in?
That is the big question. It is the universal learning plateau. And honestly, you hit the nail on the head regarding the environment.
Right.
Because you have acquired the data.
Okay.
The vocabulary lists are memorized. You did the work.
I put in the hours.
You did. But you haven't yet learned how to actually inhabit the skill organically, because the sterile, highly controlled environment of traditional learning, the desk, the quiet room, the perfectly adjusted climate control, it can only take you so far.
Until the comfort actually becomes the problem.
Exactly. That very comfort becomes the barrier itself.
And that barrier is exactly what we are dismantling in today's deep dives.
Yeah.
We've got some really fascinating source material today. We were looking at the notes and the personal journals of a highly advanced language educator who essentially just threw away the traditional textbooks.
She just completely abandoned the standard model.
She did. She walked out her front door into a freezing winter blizzard, and she discovered this radical, completely unconventional methodology for reaching C2 level fluency.
And we should probably clarify what C2 actually means in this context.
Oh, yeah, good point. So for anyone who doesn't know, C2 is basically the absolute summit of language acquisition.
It's the top of the mountain.
Yeah, it is the level where you are functionally indistinguishable from a highly educated native speaker. It is incredibly hard to reach.
Extremely rare for adult learners to achieve that.
Right. But her methodology for getting there, the mission of what we were talking about today, it doesn't involve doing more flashcards or downloading another app. It involves grueling, freezing winter nature walks.
Paired with an intensely rigorous form of cognitive training.
Okay, let's unpack this, because merging literal frostbite with advanced English grammar is definitely not your typical lesson plan.
No, it is far from it. It sounds almost crazy at first.
It really does.
But as we look closely at the actual mechanics of what she's doing out there in the snow, it becomes really clear that this isn't just some quirky, masochistic hack for language learning.
Right, she's not just torturing herself for fun.
Not at all. It is actually a masterclass in human neurobiology. It reveals so much about how our brains interact with our physical environments to acquire and synthesize and permanently retain new data.
So it's about the connection between the body and the brain.
Yes. It is fundamentally about leveraging the chaotic, physical, external world to force an internal cognitive breakthrough, the kind of breakthrough that a static textbook simply cannot provide.
So let's start right there with this really dramatic transition from the sterile indoors to the unpredictable freezing outdoors.
The sandbox of the senses, basically.
Yeah, the sandbox.
Yeah.
Because the educator we are studying, she entirely replaced her comfortable indoor study routine with these brisk, sometimes genuinely punishing winter walks.
And she's not just taking a casual stroll.
No, the objective wasn't just to get some fresh air or, get her steps in for the day. The goal was to deliberately hyper-engage her senses.
To flood the system with sensory input.
Exactly. We are talking about actively observing the really nuanced colors of the ice, the intricate, rough textures of the tree bark, the ambient acoustics of the snow crunching under her boots.
And the physical feeling of the temperature.
Right. The literal biting crispness of the cold air on her face. And then, crucially, the exercise is forcing her brain to articulate all of those exact sensory details in English. in real time.
And that shift, that move from a passive learning environment to a hyperactive, sensory-rich environment, that is the foundational mechanism here.
Because it's so different from a classroom.
It's the exact opposite. Think about what happens when you sit in a quiet room with a study guide. Your sensory input is artificially minimized.
Because you're supposed to be focusing.
Right. They tell you to remove distractions. So you're in a sensory vacuum, and your brain is trying to memorize the word for, say, freezing or numb without actually feeling freezing or numb.
You're just looking at ink on a page.
Exactly. The linguistic concept has zero physical anchor. But this outdoor methodology completely flips that paradigm.
It demands the physical anchor.
It demands that you place yourself in an environment that literally bombards your nervous system with raw data. The crunch of the frost, the flat gray of the winter sky, the sharp drop in temperature against your cheeks.
And you have to put words to it immediately.
You have to find the precise, advanced nomenclature for it while the physical sensation is actively occurring.
There is this one specific, incredibly vivid example from her notes that I just could not stop thinking about when I was reading through this.
The ducks.
Yes, the ducks. It's such a great story. So she is out on one of these walks, and it is bitterly, bitterly cold out. And she sees this waddle of ducks.
Just trying to survive the winter.
Right. They are huddled really tightly together near this semi-frozen pond, and they're desperately trying to conserve body heat. And it is this beautiful, slightly melancholy, endearing scene.
It's a very evocative image.
It is. So naturally, her first instinct is to reach into her pocket, pull out her smartphone, and take a picture. Like we all would.
Of course.
But she can't do it. Her fingers are so benumbed by the cold that she physically lacks the manual dexterity to even press the shutter button on the screen.
Her hands just won't cooperate.
Her joints are entirely stiff. It's that awful, throbbing, cold feeling. But, and this is the crazy part, instead of getting frustrated, putting her hands deep in her pockets and running home to the heater, she uses that exact physical stiffness as a prompt.
She leans into it.
She forces herself to stand there in the freezing cold and generate advanced phrases about extreme cold and joint rigidity in her target language, just standing there staring at the ducks with numb hands.
What's fascinating here is the cognitive mechanism that physical discomfort actually triggers in the brain.
Because we usually think of discomfort as a bad thing for learning.
We do, but the human brain is evolutionarily wired to prioritize information that is directly linked to physical survival. It prioritizes acute sensory input. So, when you are sitting on your comfortable couch, drinking tea, and trying to learn the word benumbed from a book, it is a remarkably low-stakes, low-priority task for your brain.
Because your life isn't in danger.
Right. The data goes into your short-term working memory, and because your body is in zero physical distress, the brain just quickly discards it. It says, we don't need this to survive. It falls right out of your head.
But wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
I understand the evolutionary argument, that pain or discomfort flags something as important. But isn't there a line?
What do you mean?
Well, if I am genuinely freezing and my fingers are going completely numb, my biological imperative is to find warmth, not to practice advanced English syntax.
That's a fair point.
Doesn't physical discomfort actually trigger distraction? It seems to me like it would pull your focus completely away from the language and redirect it entirely toward just surviving.
Yeah.
Like, is deliberately making yourself uncomfortable to the point of frostbitten fingers actually a sustainable way to learn? Or is it just a recipe for losing focus and being miserable?
That is a highly astute distinction, and the key here lies in the intensity of the discomfort.
Okay.
We are not talking about inducing systemic hypothermia here.
Well, that's good.
Right. We are talking about acute sensory novelty. You are playing on the very edge of discomfort.
The edge, okay.
Yes. When your digits begin to lose sensation, your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, it does indeed flag that physical state. It heightens your physiological arousal.
It wakes you up.
Exactly. It floods your system with mild doses of adrenaline and noradrenaline. Now, you are right. If you were actually freezing to death, your prefrontal cortex would just shut down.
You wouldn't be thinking about vocabulary.
No, you absolutely would not be able to learn grammar. But in a highly managed state of brisk discomfort, that specific neurochemical cocktail acts as a spotlight.
A spotlight on whatever you're thinking about in that moment.
Yes. It dramatically sharpens your focus. So by forcing your brain to pinpoint the exact granular vocabulary for that physical state, in that heightened moment, you completely bypass that flimsy, fragile process of rote memorization.
Because the brain thinks the word is tied to the survival state.
Precisely. The new vocabulary word binds directly to the acute physical sensation.
So because your brain is already on high alert, thinking, hey, my fingers aren't working properly, pay attention to this right now, you are essentially slipping the vocabulary word into that exact same high priority folder in your memory.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. You achieve true experiential learning.
Wow.
So the word benumbed becomes inextricably linked to the neurological memory of the biting cold air, the stiff joints in your hand, and the visual of those shivering ducks.
The discomfort is literally the anchor.
It is the anchor. You are essentially hijacking your own survival instincts to serve as a high-powered, permanent memory drive.
That is wild. And it makes the analogy I was thinking of earlier even more fitting.
What was the analogy?
To me, traditional classroom learning is kind of like sitting in a perfectly climate-controlled room, reading a dense flight manual for an airplane.
Okay, I like this.
You can memorize every single button on the dashboard. You can read about aerodynamics, and you might even get a perfect score on the written test.
You've never flown.
Exactly. But this winter walk method, it's like trying to fly the actual plane in the middle of a screaming blizzard.
You are forcing the theoretical knowledge to function under intense physical pressure.
Right. Which brings us to how exactly this knowledge is functioning out there in the snow. Because she isn't just quietly observing these ducks and, just silently thinking about words in her head.
No, she's highly active. She is utilizing a strategy she explicitly calls the soliloquy.
The soliloquy.
Yeah.
The transition from internal passive observation to active vocalized speech.
And this is where the methodology becomes intensely demanding on the learner.
Because she is out there delivering these full-blown, out-loud running commentaries to the totally empty landscape.
Just talking to the trees.
Literally. She is narrating her surroundings, her physical sensations, and her internal thoughts continuously. And the protocol gets even more intense than just talking.
The recording phase.
Yes, you are supposed to record these internal monologues on your phone so you can scrutinize the audio later.
You become your own test grader.
Exactly. You listen back to your own voice when you get home to identify your syntactical crutches, audit your own pronunciation, and basically grade your own spontaneous speech.
It's a very closed-loop system.
And just to cover all the bases, her notes mention an indoor alternative if you are totally snowed in and can't go outside.
Oh, the domestic chores routine.
Yeah. Pacing around your apartment and intensely narrating your completely mundane domestic chores to yourself out loud in C2 level English. I am currently aggressively scrubbing the calcified residue from the ceramic sink.
It sounds funny, but the strategy of self-auditing through soliloquy is remarkably sophisticated from a cognitive load perspective.
How so?
Well, think about the standard advice everyone gets for language learning. Go find a native speaker and practice conversing.
Right. Find a language partner. Chat over coffee.
It sounds great in theory, but in practice, conversing with a fluent partner is fraught with social friction.
Social friction.
Yes, you are constantly managing social anxiety. You are actively monitoring their facial expressions to see if they understand you. You are worrying about making embarrassing mistakes in front of them.
Oh, absolutely. The fear of sounding stupid is huge.
It is massive, and most critically, you rely on them to rescue you.
What do you mean by rescue?
If you pause because you can't find a word, they will naturally fill in the silence. They will supply the missing word for you, or just finish your sentence to be polite.
Oh, wow. Yeah, people do that all the time.
They do. And all of that social management, the anxiety, the reading of cues, the waiting to be rescued, it takes up a massive amount of your working memory and your cognitive bandwidth.
Okay, I see the logic there. You're removing the other person so you can focus. But let's be honest about the reality of this.
The optics of it.
Yeah, the optics. Imagine you are listening to this, and you decide to go walk your dog in a frozen, completely silent public park. And you are just loudly describing the intricate texture of frozen mud to absolutely no one.
You look unhinged.
You look totally crazy. You are basically acting as the play-by-play sports commentator for an empty, completely mundane landscape. It is objectively absurd.
It is.
And my real concern is, if I'm just talking to myself out there, aren't I just going to fossilize my own mistakes?
The risk of cementing bad habits.
Right. Because if I misuse a preposition, there is no one there to correct me. I'm just going to wire that mistake deeper and deeper into my own brain, aren't I?
You are absolutely correct that it looks absurd to an outside observer, and frankly, she readily admits that in her notes. But the dividends it pays far outweigh the risk of fossilized errors.
Really? How does she justify that?
It's primarily because of the recording and auditing phase. Let's address the error fossilization first. When you act as your own audience during the walk, you remove the social friction while maintaining the extreme cognitive demand of spontaneous speech production.
Because you're still forcing yourself to speak in real time.
Exactly. You are the sole engine of the discourse. If you don't generate the next sentence, the conversation literally dies.
There is no native speaker to throw you a life preserver.
Exactly. You have to swim or drown linguistically. That forces a level of neural recruitment that passive listening or casual rescued conversation never will.
Okay, but what about the mistakes?
Right, cementing mistakes.
Yeah.
That is precisely why the audio recording is mandatory. It's not optional.
So you can't just talk, you have to listen to it later.
Yes. When you return home and listen to the playback, you are utilizing a completely different part of your brain.
How is it different?
Well, while you were walking, you were in the active generation phase. You were focused on output. But while listening, you are in the analytical, critical phase.
So you shift from being the writer to being the editor.
Perfectly said. You can dispassionately hear exactly where your tongue stumbled. You can hear where you repeatedly relied on the word very instead of finding a better, more precise adjective. You can hear exactly where your grammatical structures broke down.
It sounds kind of painful, honestly, listening to your own mistakes.
It is a grueling, unvarnished mirror to hold up to your own skills. But you become your own feedback loop. And that internal feedback loop is often far more rigorous and unforgiving than a polite conversation partner would ever be.
That makes a lot of sense. A partner wants to be nice. Your recording just tells you the truth.
Exactly. You separate the pressure of creation from the pressure of editing.
Okay, so we are walking outside, we are leaning into the physical discomfort to trigger that survival memory, and we are talking out loud to ourselves like crazy people to build those spontaneous speech muscles.
That's the formula so far.
But I want to zero in on the environment itself because her notes emphasize the specific setting heavily.
The winter landscape.
Right. She insists on a serene, quiet winter landscape. But if the goal is just sensory input and discomfort, why a quiet winter park?
What's the alternative?
Well, if you want sensory bombardment and discomfort, why not walk down a crowded, bustling city street during rush hour?
Ah, I see.
Just walk down the street freezing and narrate the traffic, the aggressive taxi drivers, the neon signs, all the noise. Why the serene nature?
It comes down to understanding the psychological impact of the environment on the brain's baseline receptiveness.
Okay, break that down for me.
Let's contrast the two environments. A bustling city street during rush hour is chaotic. It demands constant, low-level threat assessment from your nervous system.
Because there's so much going on.
Yes. Your brain is subconsciously calculating the trajectory of pedestrians so you don't bump into them. It's listening for erratic cars. It's actively tuning out sirens and construction noise.
It takes effort just to walk down the street without getting hit.
Exactly. That creates an incredibly high cognitive load just to exist in that space safely.
So your brain is basically running too many background apps to have enough processing power left over for advanced linguistics.
That is a perfect analogy. You are maxing out your RAM on survival.
And the winter landscape is different.
Entirely different. The serene winter landscape is fundamentally restorative. The silence and the visual tranquility, the softness of the snow, the stillness of the trees, it actively mitigates that external cognitive load.
Because there are no cars to dodge.
Right. Your brain doesn't have to monitor for unpredictable threats. And this massive freeing up of processing power allows for much deeper, sustained focus on the incredibly demanding internal task of complex language generation.
So the calm environment is actually doing some of the heavy lifting for you.
It creates the space for the work to happen.
Her notes also mention that the crisp ambient air is physically invigorating and that a relaxed state of mind actively enhances neuroplasticity.
It does.
And she even takes this a step further with a concept she calls ambient immersion.
This is a brilliant tactic.
It really is. She says that if she isn't actively doing her soliloquy, like if she's just taking a break from talking, she's listening to C2 level audio. But not just any audio, specifically podcasts or audiobooks about nature, wilderness travel, or winter survival.
She is thematically aligning everything.
Exactly. She is deliberately matching the auditory input going into her ears to the physical environment she is standing in.
That concept of thematic congruence is absolutely vital, and it is just a brilliant hack for the brain.
How does the brain process that?
Imagine hearing highly advanced descriptive vocabulary about frostbite or survival tactics or huge snowdrifts while you are physically experiencing the biting cold and actively staring at a frosted landscape.
It's like 4D learning.
It is. You are creating a profoundly multi-layered learning environment. The visual input from your eyes, the auditory input from your headphones, and the physical somatic reality from your skin, they are all perfectly aligned.
They're all telling the same story.
Exactly. They're all firing together, reinforcing the exact same neural pathway simultaneously. It is full brain synchronization.
Let me stop you there and ask you to look under the hood for a second, biologically speaking.
Sure.
We throw around the word neuroplasticity a lot in these deep dives.
Well,
But does a calm environment physically change how our brain wires new words?
it absolutely does.
Like if I am sitting in a traditional high school Spanish class, sweating because the teacher might call on me at any second, versus walking through a beautiful snowy pine forest. Is there an actual biological difference in how my brain absorbs a vocabulary word?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we absolutely see a biological difference.
Okay, what is it?
We have to look at how traditional classrooms, despite their absolute best intentions, often inadvertently induce a state of low-level chronic stress.
Oh, school's incredibly stressful.
Right. You have the social pressure of your peers judging you. You have the evaluative authority of the teacher standing at the front. You have the harsh artificial fluorescent lighting.
The bell's ringing.
The rigid physical posture required to just sit at a small desk for an hour. That entire environment triggers the release of stress hormones, primarily cortisol.
And cortisol is bad for learning.
Cortisol actively hinders neuroplasticity. It restricts the brain's ability to form and consolidate new neural connections because it shifts the brain's resources toward immediate, rigid survival responses.
Fight or flight.
Yes. It prioritizes defense rather than creative, expansive learning.
So cortisol basically locks the doors to the memory bank.
Yes, that's exactly what it does. Now, in stark contrast, walking through a serene, aesthetically pleasing natural environment promotes the release of dopamine and endorphins.
The feel-good chemicals.
Right. And it activates what we call the default mode network in the brain. This creates a relaxed yet highly alert physiological state.
Relaxed but alert.
Yes. And dopamine is essentially the chemical signal that tells the brain, this is valuable, save this.
Oh, wow. So dopamine is the save button.
Exactly. So the natural environment literally optimizes the brain for plasticity.
That is fascinating.
Furthermore, the intrinsic reward of the peaceful walk prevents your motivation from waning.
Because it's actually pleasant to be out there.
Right. The grueling act of learning advanced grammar is paired directly with an act of physiological restoration. You feel physically better after the walk, so your brain wants to do it again tomorrow.
That is just wild to think about. The traditional classroom, which is a multi-million-dollar structure built specifically for learning, might actually be stressing our biology out too much to learn efficiently.
In many ways, yes, it works against our biology.
Meanwhile, a completely free, freezing walk in the woods primes the brain perfectly.
Nature's a very effective classroom.
But, and this is a big bulb, even with the brain perfectly primed, bathed in dopamine, feeling great, there is still a massive cognitive hurdle that she writes about extensively in her journals.
The translation trap.
Yes, the translation trap. How do you actually stop translating from your native language in your head? Because we all do it.
It is the hardest habit to break.
You think of what you want to say in English, or
Yeah.
whatever your native language is, and then you try to frantically convert it into the target language.
And that translation trap is the exact threshold between intermediate proficiency and true advanced fluency.
It's the wall.
It is. As long as you are thinking in your native language and then translating the words into your target language, you will always be a step behind.
Because it takes too much time.
Right. The absolute necessity of C2 mastery is bypassing the native language entirely. You have to formulate your observations instantaneously in the target language.
Right, and her notes are incredibly hardcore about this. You have to short-circuit the translation process.
Zero native language allowed.
But what happens when you inevitably hit a roadblock? Let's say you are walking, you are doing your soliloquy, you are describing a frozen puddle, and the exact word you need, let's say you want to say the ice is opaque, just completely eludes you.
You draw a total blank.
Right. You draw a blank. What do you do? Because her protocol advises a couple of very strict things.
She has rules for failure.
She does. First, she says, if you absolutely must, you can jot down a quick phonetic note or just the core concept on your phone to research when you get home.
But you don't look it up then?
No, you absolutely do not stop walking to open a dictionary app. You do not break the immersion. You don't take your eyes off the environment.
Because that breaks the flow state.
Right. But the second option is the one I find completely fascinating. Using circumlocution to deduce a workaround on the fly.
Circumlocution is brilliant.
And she writes that the paramount, totally unbreakable rule of this entire method is never, ever let a vocabulary deficit derail the momentum of the experience.
This is where we shift into cognitive strategy. Circumlocution is a fascinating psychological pivot.
Because a lot of people think it means you failed.
Exactly. Often, language learners view circumlocution as a failure, a glaring sign that they don't know the right word and they have to clumsily stumble around it.
I'm like, oh, I don't know the word, I'm just guessing.
Right. But analytically, from a cognitive science perspective, circumlocution is a highly advanced cognitive skill.
Really? It's a skill.
It is. It demonstrates immense mental flexibility. It is the ability to instantaneously map alternative linguistic pathways to a concept when the direct neural route is blocked.
So if the main road is closed, you find a detour immediately.
Precisely. If you don't know the word sleet, can you immediately, without pausing, describe it as semi-frozen precipitation that aggressively bounces off the pavement?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because reading her description of circumlocution instantly reminded me of that old TV show MacGyver.
Oh, MacGyver, yes.
You know, the secret agent who could defuse a ticking bomb with, like, a paperclip, a shoelace, and a piece of chewing gum.
He never had the right tools.
Never. And circumlocution is basically linguistic MacGyvering. You are out in the cold, you hit a block, and you don't have the exact pristine C2 level vocabulary word you need in your toolbox.
So you improvise.
You improvise.
Yeah.
You just build a sentence out of whatever spare verbal parts you have lying around in your brain at that moment. You duct tape a couple of basic adjectives and verbs together until the core meaning gets across, and you keep moving forward.
You don't let the bomb go off.
You don't let the bomb go off, you keep the momentum alive.
I love that analogy, and this raises an important question about how we fundamentally deal with failure in real time, and not just in language learning, but in any complex system.
How so?
Well, traditional education relentlessly punishes the roadblock.
Oh, absolutely. Red ink everywhere.
Right. It trains us that if you don't know the exact specific answer, you must stop, raise your hand, find the correct answer in the back of the book, and try again.
It demands perfection.
It prioritizes pristine accuracy over momentum. But this outdoor methodology argues the exact opposite.
It says momentum is everything.
Yes. It argues that communicative intent and momentum must always prevail over flawless execution. The ongoing velocity of the thought process is infinitely more important than the precision of a single noun.
Because in the real world, conversations don't pause so you can check a dictionary.
People won't wait for you.
If you freeze up in a boardroom because you forgot a word, you lose the room. The moment is gone.
Exactly. By forcing yourself to build that MacGyver sentence on the fly, you are actively exercising the exact improvisational neural muscles required for true native-like fluency.
Because native speakers do it too.
All the time. Native speakers forget words every day, but they circumlocute so smoothly we barely even notice they did it.
We just call it talking.
Right. So those phonetic notes you jot down on your phone for later, they aren't corrections of a failure. They're simply blueprints for upgrading your toolkit after the exercise is successfully over.
Okay, let's take a breath here and look at what we are actually asking a person to do with this method.
It's a lot.
It is a massive undertaking. We are doing highly intense, sensory-rich walks in freezing temperatures.
Yes.
We are improvising complex language on the fly. We are acting like our own sports commentators for barren landscapes.
While hijacking our survival instincts.
Right, hijacking survival instincts with mild physical distress and recording ourselves to ruthlessly critique our own grammar later.
It's intense.
It sounds absolutely exhausting. I mean, I feel tired just summarizing the list of things you have to do.
The cognitive load is immense.
And to her credit, she addresses this directly in her notes. She actively warns learners about how to schedule this intense cognitive workout so they don't completely burn out in like 3 days.
Because the cognitive demand of this specific methodology is so extraordinarily high, the actual schedule of implementation is just as critical as the linguistic exercises themselves.
You can't just do it all day.
If you attempt this for 2 hours on a Saturday morning, your brain will simply shut down. you will be exhausted.
Which is why she aggressively advocates for incremental implementation.
Microdosing.
Yes, microdosing. She writes about taking brief 15-minute forays into a familiar environment. Just 15 minutes.
That's it.
That's all. She explicitly warns against the hubris of burdening yourself with unrealistic expectations, like trying to memorize encyclopedic volumes of winter vocabulary in one massive, freezing hike.
It won't work.
She argues that the daily microdose of this intense, focused immersion exponentially outperforms those grueling 3-hour cramming sessions we all used to do the night before a final exam in college.
Just slow drip method.
Right. And she reiterates that in these short bursts, you just have to completely embrace flawed syntax. It's an inevitable stepping stone. You can't be perfect.
The contrast she is drawing between the microdosing philosophy and the traditional cramming paradigm is deeply, deeply rooted in the biology of how human memory works.
Break that down for us. Why is cramming so bad?
Well, when you cram for 3 hours, you are entirely overloading the brain's working memory. You are flooding the system with too much data all at once.
Like trying to pour a bucket of water into a shot glass.
Exactly. You might retain that information long enough to pass a test the next morning, but the long-term retention drops precipitously. In cognitive science, we refer to this as the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve.
The forgetting curve.
Yes. Without ongoing reinforcement, the brain initiates a biological process called synaptic pruning.
What's pruning?
It's where the brain actively clears out those fragile, unreinforced connections to make room for new, more relevant data.
Oh, so the brain just takes out the trash.
Precisely. If you don't use it, the brain assumes it's trash and deletes it. But slow, sustained daily exposure, the 15-minute microdose interrupts that pruning process completely.
Because you keep using it.
Right. It leverages what we call spaced repetition. By forcing the brain to access those specific linguistic pathways for a short, intense burst every single day, you send a clear, undeniable biological signal that this information is vital for daily functioning.
Don't delete this.
Exactly. Keep this network active.
It's basically high-intensity interval training HIIT for the brain, right?
A mental HIIT workout.
Yeah. Because instead of forcing yourself to run a mental marathon where, your form eventually breaks down, you get sloppy, your knees hurt, and you end up exhausted and hating the exercise altogether.
You do a sprint.
You do a 15-minute all-out mental sprint. You give it 100% focused, intense effort. You push your cognitive heart rate to the absolute max, and then you completely stop and go rest.
That analogy is perfectly apt. 15 minutes of total, unbroken cognitive immersion.
Where you are doing everything at once.
Yes, where you are actively synthesizing the physical environment, the acute somatic sensation of the cold, and the advanced vocabulary generation. That 15 minutes will create far more durable, myelinated neural pathways than 3 hours of passively staring at a vocabulary list in a warm library.
It's quality over quantity.
Completely. And your point about form breaking down during a marathon, that is exactly why the acceptance of flawed syntax is so crucial here.
Because you're moving too fast to be perfect.
If you demand grammatical perfection during these 15-minute bursts, you will paralyze yourself. The microdose is about building the habit of fearless execution.
Just getting it out there.
Yes. You can fix the grammar and the auditing phase later when you listen to the recording.
Okay, so let's say you built the habit. You are out there doing your 15-minute brain sprints in the snowy park every single day.
You're in the routine.
You're in the routine, and you aren't afraid of making mistakes anymore. You're circumlocuting like MacGyver. Now, how do we upgrade the actual quality of the language being produced?
Moving to mastery.
Because her ultimate goal isn't just to speak functional, passable English. She doesn't just want to be understood. She wants masterful, literary C2 level English.
She wants to be eloquent.
And a huge portion of her notes focuses on this conscious shift from what she calls literal reporting to painting vivid tableaus.
This is the inflection point where language transitions from being a mere tool of utility, just exchanging basic information, to becoming an instrument of true artistry and profound expression.
It's a big jump.
It is the conscious elevation of discourse. It's moving from reactive language to proactive language.
She gives a really brilliant example of this transition in her journal.
The tree example.
Yes, the tree. So she says, the literal, functional way to describe your walk is to look at a tree, just say, I see a bare tree, or the tree has no leaves.
Which is perfectly fine grammatically.
It gets the job done. It is completely accurate. But she challenges the learner to elevate that base reality to a vivid tableau.
To paint a picture.
So I see a bare tree must become something like a skeletal silhouette, starkly contrasted against the leaden sky.
It's beautiful.
It is incredibly poetic. But to do that, she notes that you can't just rely on having a wider vocabulary. You can't just know more words. You have to artificially inject advanced grammar to match those advanced words.
Structure matters just as much as vocabulary.
Right. You can't just use... starting a sentence with seldom have I seen.
What?
Or forcing yourself to use hypothetical third conditionals, which are really tricky, like, had the wind been any fiercer, the brittle branches would have undoubtedly snapped.
By artificially injecting these complex grammatical structure, the inversions, the third conditionals, you are forcing the brain into higher order cognitive processing.
It has to work harder.
Much harder. When you just say, I see a bare tree, you are engaging in simple identification. You see a thing, you name the thing.
Right. Very basic.
But when you construct a sentence like, had the wind been any fiercer, the branches would have snapped, you are no longer just naming the reality around you.
What are you doing that?
You are analyzing it. You are manipulating its variables, and you are contextualizing it within alternate realities. You are doing mental physics with the language.
So what does this all mean for the person actually walking in the park? Let's role play this for a second.
Okay.
If I am walking through the snow, and I just say, the sky is gray and the tree has no leaves, I am essentially functioning as a security camera.
Just recording data.
I am just passively recording raw visual data and spitting it out in English. But if I pause and I look at that exact same tree and I force myself to say, a skeletal silhouette starkly contrasted against the leaden sky, it completely shifts the paradigm of communication.
It changes everything.
I am no longer just a camera. I am suddenly directing the listener's emotions. Because skeletal implies death or fragility. Leaden implies this heavy, oppressive, almost suffocating weight. I am imposing a very specific mood onto the landscape. I am engaging in authentic storytelling.
Exactly. You have transitioned from merely being an observer of the experience to becoming the author of the experience.
Yeah, author. I love that.
And that artificial injection of advanced grammar is the precise mechanical lever that makes it happen.
It unlocks the storytelling.
Yes. When you force yourself to use that hypothetical third conditional, had the wind been any fiercer, you are training your brain to see not just what is directly in front of you, but what could have been.
You're adding imagination.
You are layering human imagination and physics over raw visual observation. That ability to seamlessly move between reality and hypothetical abstraction in real time is the absolute hallmark of profound C2 level fluency.
You know, what's truly fascinating to me is that this mastery of expression doesn't just stop at describing physical objects like trees and heavy skies.
It goes inward.
Her notes take it so much deeper. She moves from describing external physical states to exploring deep internal states and really nuanced cultural concepts.
Cultural fluency.
Exactly. She argues that achieving cultural fluency is the absolute zenith of language acquisition. It's the final boss.
Because true fluency requires understanding the cultural zeitgeist, the collective psychology of the people who speak the language naturally, not just memorizing the dictionary definitions of their words.
You have to know how they think.
Language and culture are completely inextricably linked. You cannot master one without fully inhabiting the other.
And she highlights weather-related idioms as a perfect accessible gateway for this, especially since she's out in the winter.
It's very fitting.
For example, she notes that if you are completely overwhelmed with work, you say you are snowed under.
Right.
Or if the weather gets suddenly aggressively cold, it's a cold snap. It shows how deeply the climate actually affects the psychology and the idioms of the language itself.
The environment shapes the speech.
But then it goes way beyond just idioms into deep emotional articulation. She argues that these quiet winter walks provide the perfect backdrop for articulating really complex, abstract psychological concepts.
Like what?
Well, things like the specific melancholy of the winter blues, or the actual clinical reality of seasonal affective disorder.
The emotional weight of winter.
Right. Or, going in a more positive, comforting direction, she spends a lot of time exploring the famous Danish concept of hæg.
Yeah.
Which she describes in her soliloquies as this profound, almost primal craving for a convivial, cozy sanctuary to counteract the harshness of the outside elements.
Here, language truly transcends basic communication and becomes a vehicle for profound mindfulness and self-analysis.
It's like therapy on a walk.
It is. Articulating the complex emotional landscape of winter turns a simple physical stroll into a deep psychological introspection. You aren't just observing that the air is cold anymore, you are analyzing and articulating your deeply human emotional response to the cold.
Your relationship to the cold.
Exactly. You are exploring the very human contrast between isolation in nature and the desire for sanctuary indoors.
And this brings up a huge philosophical question for me, and I'd really love your take on it as an expert.
Claire, let's hear it.
If you are walking in the bitter cold and you are yearning to go inside and get warm, but you do not possess a specific cultural word like hig in your vocabulary,
Okay.
can you ever fully experience or articulate that exact type of cozy sanctuary? Like, does the literal lack of the word in your brain limit the depth of the feeling you are capable of experiencing?
That is a phenomenal question. You are touching on the very core of linguistic relativity, which is often referred to in cognitive science as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
The pure word, right?
The theory fundamentally suggests that the vocabulary and the grammatical structure of the language we possess actually shapes the contours and the boundaries of our thoughts.
So the words make the thoughts.
In many ways, yes. If you only have the basic word cozy in your mental dictionary, your understanding of your own experience is somewhat bounded by the limits of that word.
And cozy is pretty basic.
Right, cozy just implies warm and comfortable, a nice blanket. But when you acquire a complex cultural concept like hig, which encompasses not just physical warmth, but social conviviality, the specific ambience of soft lighting, the feeling of shared sanctuary from a harsh external world, you are given an entirely new, high-resolution lens through which to perceive your own life.
A high-resolution lens. I love that.
Expanding your vocabulary in this way doesn't just make you sound smarter at a dinner party, it literally expands your emotional bandwidth. You can categorize and appreciate your own internal desires with much greater fidelity.
That is just incredible to think about. By taking a freezing walk in the woods and fighting to find these precise advanced words, you are actually expanding your human capacity to feel and understand your own existence.
You're upgrading your brain's operating system.
Upgrading the OS, yeah. But before we get too lost in the beautiful poetry of it all, I love that her notes give us a fantastic, deeply humbling reality check.
Because reality always interrupts.
It always does. We have spent the last hour painting this incredibly idealized poetic picture of a serene, highly intellectual learner strolling gracefully through a winter wonderland, pondering the deep nature of hig, and painting verbal tableaus of skeletal silhouettes.
It sounds very majestic.
It does. But what happens when the unpredictable physical environment aggressively reasserts itself?
Well, as anyone who has spent any real time in nature knows, the physical world rarely respects our intellectual reveries.
Nature doesn't care about your vocabulary.
Not at all. It has a habit of interrupting.
It absolutely does. And she shares this incredibly comedic, very self-deprecating anecdote in her journal about this exact thing.
Nice.
Yes. She writes that she is deep in one of these intense poetic soliloquies. She is completely in the zone, mentally crafting this magnificent, masterful, structurally complex sentence about the crystalline majesty of the frozen path stretching out before her.
A beautiful tableau.
Right. She is feeling like she has reached the absolute peak of her C2 fluency powers. She is a poet, and then mid-sentence, she unceremoniously steps on a hidden patch of black ice.
Oh, no.
Her feet just completely fly out from under her, and she lands squarely and violently on her back in the freezing mud.
The majestic poet falls in the mud.
The sublime immediately meets the ridiculous. All her profound, poetic, linguistic musings just evaporate in a split second of flailing arms and gravity.
It is the absolute perfect synthesis of the entire methodology wrapped into one split-second event.
It really is.
Mother Nature's comedic timing becomes the ultimate unforgiving teacher.
And what's brilliant about her mindset and why I think she actually reached this level of mastery is that she didn't just get mad, curse, and limp home to a hot shower.
She used it.
She used it. Even in that moment of pain and embarrassment, she harvested the absolute failure for new vocabulary. She lay there in the mud staring at the sky and literally used the event to drill the words unceremonious, black ice, equilibrium, and most importantly, given her poetic musings just seconds prior, The word hubris.
That is dedication, and it proves the core thesis that learning thrives in the unexpected.
The unpredictable.
Yes, the sterile, perfectly controlled classroom cannot provide a sudden, hidden patch of black ice to test your linguistic reflexes.
A classroom is too safe.
When she slips, she experiences absolute failure, physical shock, and shattered physical equilibrium. This creates a massive involuntary adrenaline spike in her system.
Right. The survival instinct kicks in again.
And as we discussed earlier regarding the numbed fingers, the hippocampus, the brain's main memory center, prioritizes information encoded during high arousal states. In cognitive science, we call this state-dependent memory.
I can't help but laugh at the imagery of it laying in the mud, practicing vocabulary, but the science backing it up is so robust.
It is undeniable.
Public humiliation or physical shock is actually an incredible memory aid. Think about it. You, listening to this, you are certainly never, ever going to forget the nuanced definition of the word equilibrium once you have spectacularly lost yours on a sheet of black ice in the middle of a public park.
Especially while actively talking out loud to yourself about crystalline majesty.
Exactly. The physical jolt, combined with the massive spike of adrenaline and the sheer embarrassment of the moment, it chemically burns that vocabulary word into your neural pathways forever.
Precisely. The environment dictates the lesson.
Not the textbook.
No. The methodology demands that you remain completely open and porous to whatever the external physical world provides.
You have to accept what happens.
Whether it is a profound, dopamine-fueled moment of tranquility looking at a bare tree, or a sudden adrenaline-fueled, humbling lesson in gravity, you do not control the curriculum out there. The winter walk does.
You're just along for the ride.
You merely provide the intense cognitive effort required to articulate whatever happens to you.
So if we pull all of these complex threads together, the core mechanics we've extracted from this educator's notes are actually incredibly powerful, and they extend far beyond just learning a language.
They apply to almost any complex cognitive endeavor.
Right. We are looking at a methodology that demands you deliberately step out of your comfortable, sterile environment and into an extreme, unpredictable physical space.
That's step one.
You use active sensory rehearsal, talking out loud to yourself, doing that MacGyvering of circumlocution to force your brain into producing spontaneous, active thought rather than just passive consumption.
Step two.
You strictly manage your cognitive load through microdosed consistency, focusing on intense 15-minute daily bursts to avoid burnout and leverage spaced repetition.
Crucial for long-term retention.
And finally, you maintain a profound willingness to embrace absolute humiliation, whether it's looking absurd while narrating a walk to your dog, or literally falling flat on your back in the freezing mud.
By consciously combining these elements, the physical discomfort, the active generation, the microdosing, and the humility, you are no longer passively studying a subject.
You're living it.
You are actively physically living it. You are forcing your brain's neural pathways to physically rewire themselves in real-time response to real-world stimuli.
It's an active rewiring.
It is a highly demanding but profoundly effective paradigm for elevating mastery in any complex subject, linguistic or otherwise. It completely bridges the gap between knowing about something and actually doing it.
Which leaves you with something really fascinating to think about as you go about your day. We have spent this entire deep dive looking at how stepping into a freezing, pristine, unpredictable winter landscape can so dramatically rewire our neural pathways, trigger profound mindfulness, and exponentially enhance our ability to learn and articulate complex thoughts.
The benefits of the extreme environment.
But it makes you wonder about the exact opposite scenario. How might the mundane, highly controlled physical spaces we spend the vast majority of our time in, our perfectly temperature-controlled offices, our cozy, unchanging living rooms, the sterile classrooms we sit in, be secretly limiting our brains?
It's a sobering thought.
If we accept that the physical environment dictates the lesson and profoundly shapes our neuroplasticity, what exactly are our everyday, ultra-comfortable environments silently teaching us? Are they keeping our cognitive potential artificially capped simply because they never demand that we adapt?
That is a profound question to consider the next time you find yourself entirely comfortable, completely unchallenged in a quiet, temperature-controlled room. What aren't you learning because you aren't cold?
Absolutely. Well, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive into this fascinating methodology. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration and taking the time to unpack all the science and the stories with us. We hope you found some fresh, perhaps slightly uncomfortable perspectives to take with you on your own learning journeys, whatever they may be. Until next time, step outside, stay curious, embrace the unexpected patches of ice, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Usually when we experience something truly just breathtaking in the natural world, there is this expectation that we will be able to effortlessly convey that majesty to someone else.
Right.
Like you go on a hike, you witness this stunning sunset over a canyon, and you rush back to tell your friends, but then you open your mouth and the words they just fail.
They completely fall flat.
Exactly. You say, it was really pretty, or it was so big. And it is incredibly frustrating.
Oh, totally.
Because it is like you are experiencing life on this massive state-of-the-art high-definition screen in your mind, but then when you try to transmit that image to someone else, you are forced to use a fuzzy black and white signal.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. The translation just completely breaks down.
Right. So today we are hacking that bottleneck. We are taking a really stark, freezing winter landscape and using it as a sort of linguistic training ground.
Yeah.
The goal here is to transition from basic survival level communication to deeply immersive emotional storytelling. And for you listening right now, this matters regardless of your background.
Absolutely.
Whether you are actively trying to write better, or, whether you need to communicate a complex vision at work, or if you just want to simply appreciate your daily surroundings on a deeper level.
Yeah, it applies everywhere.
We are going to show you how to transition from being a passive observer of your environment to an active curator of language.
Okay.
Let's unpack this.
Well, when you think about a deep winter landscape, the most defining characteristic isn't actually the presence of snow.
Wait, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually the absence of everything else.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Because the dense foliage of summer and the vibrant colors of autumn, they just disappear entirely. The environment is stripped down to its barest architectural elements.
Right, it's just branches and rocks and ice.
Exactly. You are left with a landscape that is utterly stark and entirely exposed. And, a lot of people equate that emptiness with a lack of stimuli. They assume a barren landscape means there is simply less to observe.
Because we are so conditioned to associate nature with, abundance. Right.
Right, exactly.
We expect the visual overload of a jungle or a blooming spring meadow. If it's not green and bursting with life, we think it's empty.
But cognitive science actually tells us something completely different about how the human brain processes information.
Okay, how so?
So in a dense summer forest, your brain's reticular activating system is working overtime just to filter out the visual noise.
Like all the movement and color.
Yeah, there are millions of leaves, shifting shadows, insects, underbrush. Your brain has to ignore 99% of that just so you can walk a straight line without tripping.
Wow, okay.
The signal-to-noise ratio is incredibly poor. But in deep winter, when that visual clutter is stripped away, the signal-to-noise ratio violently flips.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The snow essentially acts as a pristine blank canvas. So the absence of noise, paradoxically, makes it much easier to observe the granular details that remain.
Especially the physical evidence left behind by animal life, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because it completely shifts how you interact with the space. You go from being a hiker, passively taking in a view, to an active investigator.
Right, you're looking for clues.
Yeah, you are decrypting these myriad tracks in the snow. And I love that concept of decrypting from our source material today, because it frames the snowy field not as a piece of scenery, but as this complex narrative of survival that you have to actively read.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of that decryption process. By stripping away the visual noise, nature artificially enhances our focus.
It forces you to pay attention.
It forces the observer to deduce the story,
Yeah.
Think about the stark contrasts in the specific evidence left behind. You might find the delicate, cloven-hoofed prints of a foraging deer in one area.
Right.
And then just a few yards away, you see the erratic bounding trajectory of a hare.
And the language we use to describe those two paths naturally mirrors the physical biomechanics of the animals. It's almost like embodied cognition.
Yes, precisely.
Because when you say cloven-hoofed prints, the words themselves feel grounded, specific, and careful. It implies this slow, methodical, calorie-preserving search for food beneath the snow.
Which perfectly matches the concept of foraging.
Exactly. But then you look at the hare, erratic, bounding trajectory, the syllables are chaotic. You can practically feel the high-energy, survival-driven evasion tactics in the way the phrase just bounces around the mouth.
And that level of descriptive accuracy, where the cadence of the vocabulary mimics the physics of the subject, that is only possible because the snow has isolated the movement.
Because otherwise you wouldn't even see it.
Exactly. In July, you wouldn't see the erratic bounding trajectory. You would just see like a split-second blur of brown fur disappearing into the green brush.
Right, it's just gone.
But the blank canvas of the snow isolates the action. It freezes the geometry of the animal's path in time, which allows the human mind to fully process and articulate what actually happened.
It makes me think of a heavily redacted government document.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Right. Imagine you are handed a file and 95% of the page is blacked out with thick marker.
Okay.
There are just these massive expanses of blank space with only 3 or 4 isolated words left visible on the white paper. Strangely, that massive redaction actually heightens your focus.
It totally does.
Those few remaining words carry so much more weight and reveal more about the hidden story than if you were just, skimming a completely full page of text.
Oh, absolutely.
The redaction forces you to hyper-focus on the clues that remain. So does the starkness of an environment artificially force us to become better detectives of language?
It absolutely does, because the brain abhors a vacuum. When you are deprived of constant, overwhelming stimuli, your brain becomes starved for input.
You want something to chew on.
Exactly. So when it finally receives a data point, like a high-contrast track in the snow, it analyzes it with a level of scrutiny that it would never bother applying in a cluttered environment.
Wow.
You become a detective because the sensory deprivation of the environment demands it.
But if the snow acts as this incredible magnifying glass to reveal the subtle, delicate tracks of a hair, it also dramatically amplifies the shock of encountering something massive.
Oh, yeah.
Because if the visual noise is gone, anything that breaks the white canvas is going to register like a thunderclap.
Which brings us to the phenomenon of scale. And really, the sheer linguistic challenge of describing something that genuinely shocks the nervous system.
All right, it's so hard to do.
There is a classic scenario from the source material. Someone is walking along the periphery of a frozen lake in Canada. The environment is completely silent and empty, and they suddenly stumble upon a fully grown moose.
And if you have ever been in close proximity to a wild moose, you know they are staggeringly, almost incomprehensibly large.
They are huge.
They don't look like they belong in the modern era. But when that person returns to camp and is asked to recount the experience, the initial knee-jerk description is almost always completely inadequate.
Right, they just say, it was really, really big.
Yeah, really big.
That's it.
And that right there is the exact bottleneck we are trying to shatter. The human brain experiences profound awe, the nervous system spikes, but the tongue produces a baseline utilitarian adjective.
Really, really big is just a measurement.
Exactly. It tells the listener absolutely nothing about the visceral experience of standing near that animal.
So why do we do that? Why does the brain default to big when it just witnessed absolute majesty?
It's a cognitive overload response. When we encounter something that shatters our immediate expectations or dwarfs our physical scale, the regions of the brain responsible for complex language processing, like Broca's area, can momentarily stall.
Wait, they literally stall. Yeah, awe is an emotion that specifically deals with vastness and the need for cognitive accommodation. Your brain is scrambling to update its internal model of the world to fit this giant creature.
Oh, wow.
And in that moment of scramble, it reaches for the most accessible, low-energy vocabulary it has, which is big.
Because it's too busy dealing with the awe to find a better word.
Exactly. To overcome that, we have to intentionally apply advanced linguistic frameworks. In language acquisition, this is often referred to as reaching for the C2 level.
Okay, let's break down what C2 actually means, because it's not just some buzzword, right?
Not at all. C2 refers to the highest level on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, or the CEFR scale.
Right.
When someone is learning a language, A1 is a beginner, B2 is conversational fluency, and C2 is absolute mastery.
But it's not just having a big vocabulary, is it?
No, C2 isn't just about memorizing a dictionary of SAT words. A C2 speaker has the ability to convey fine shades of meaning, to use complex syntax, and most importantly, to perfectly match the emotional register of their vocabulary to the emotional reality of the event.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's about precision and nuance, not just volume.
So applying that C2 methodology to the moose encounter, we drop really, really big.
Right.
And the upgraded description from the source becomes an imposing, almost prehistoric behemoth, standing incongruously against the stark white expanse. Its sheer magnitude was breathtaking.
let's deconstruct the mechanics of that specific upgrade. Why does prehistoric behemoth succeed where really big fails?
Well, I think because it introduces time and mythology into the physical description. Big is just geometry.
Yeah.
But prehistoric implies that this animal operates on an evolutionary timescale that makes human existence look like a blip.
Oh, definitely.
It makes the creatures sound ancient, like something out of the Pleistocene epoch that shouldn't even exist in the modern world. It gives the moose a sense of ancient authority.
That's a great observation. And then we have the specific structural placement of the word incongruously. The phrase is standing incongruously against the stark white expanse.
Wait, why incongruously? That sounds a bit, I don't know, clinical for nature description. Why does that work better than just saying it looked out of place?
Because incongruously specifically implies a clash of systems, like a failure to harmonize.
Okay.
It highlights the aggressive, almost violent contrast between this massive, dark, structurally complex creature and the perfectly blank, delicate, pristine canvas of the snow.
Right, because the snow is silent and fragile.
Exactly. And the moose is this dense wall of muscle and dark fur. The word incongruously acts as the linguistic hinge that connects those two violently opposing forces.
Wow, yeah.
It captures the psychological shock of the encounter, the feeling that this animal's largeness is somehow breaking the rules of the empty lake.
It conveys the emotional weight of standing in front of it. And what's brilliant is that this exact same linguistic structure works on the complete opposite end of the physical spectrum.
How so?
You can apply the exact same contrast to a diminutive winter bird.
Oh, the robin in the snow.
Yes. Think about spotting a robin perched on a snow-covered branch. The C2 description of that is, the robin's vibrant crimson breast provided a startling juxtaposition against the monochromatic landscape. It was a fleeting spark of vitality amidst the dormant frosted branches.
Notice the structural symmetry there.
Yeah, it's so similar.
With the massive moose, it was a dark behemoth incongruous against the white expanse. With the tiny robin, it is a crimson breast, creating a startling juxtaposition against a monochromatic landscape.
It is the exact same contrast of subject versus canvas.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the struggle to describe the moose or the robin isn't fundamentally about a lack of words. It is about a failure to capture awe. We settle for baseline adjectives like really big or really red because we let the cognitive overload dictate our speech. We have to actively train ourselves to push past that initial shock and deliberately reach for the vocabulary that matches the emotional intensity of the visual data.
Okay, but, I mean, if I come back from a hike and tell my friend at a coffee shop that I saw a fleeting spark of vitality amidst the dormant branches, they are going to laugh at me and ask if I swallowed a poetry textbook.
Yeah, that's fair.
Does practicing this kind of hyper-elevated language actually make me a better communicator, or does it just make me sound incredibly pretentious? Like, how do we balance this poetic accuracy with actual normal human conversation?
That is the most common and honestly valid concern when we talk about advanced language acquisition. But the goal of practicing C2 vocabulary isn't to walk around speaking like a 19th century novelist at the grocery store.
Okay, good.
The goal is expanding your internal capacity for perception.
So it's an internal exercise, not necessarily a script for public use.
Exactly. Think of it like upgrading the lens on a professional camera. When you put a high-end macro lens on a camera, you aren't just taking a better picture. The lens is physically capable of letting in more light and capturing microscopic data that was literally invisible to the standard lens.
Oh, I like that analogy.
By training your brain to generate phrases like startling juxtaposition, you are upgrading your cognitive lens. You are forcing your brain to notice the semantic weight of the color red against the color white.
So even if I don't use those exact words later.
Right, even if you ultimately filter that down for a casual conversation and just say, the red on that robin against the white snow was almost shocking to look at, the underlying structural observation remains intact.
You have still communicated the core emotional truth of the contrast, rather than just saying, I saw a red bird.
Exactly. You scale the vocabulary up in private practice so that your natural conversational baseline permanently elevates.
That makes total sense. You are training the machinery of your perception. But, so far, we have only been talking about the visual machinery. We've painted this cinematic picture of the behemoth and the crimson bird, but vision is only one slice of the sensory pie.
That's true.
What happens when we close our eyes in that monochromatic landscape? Once the visual noise is stripped away by the stark landscape, your brain compensates. It starts searching for other inputs, which completely changes how we process sound.
And winter possesses a profoundly unique acoustic signature. This isn't just a subjective feeling. Either it is grounded in physics and acoustics. Snow acts as a highly efficient acoustic dampener.
Break down the physics of that for us. Why does snow literally delete sound?
It comes down to the microscopic geometry of the snowflake. When snow falls and accumulates, it doesn't pack into a solid block of ice right away.
Right.
It forms a porous lattice structure. A snowbank is actually mostly trapped air. Yeah. So when sound waves, which are just vibrations of air molecules, hit a hard surface like summer dirt or concrete, they bounce off, creating echoes and ambient reverberation.
Like bouncing a tennis ball against a wall.
Exactly. But when sound waves hit freshly fallen snow, they enter those tiny porous air pockets within the snowflake lattice.
Oh, I see.
The sound waves bounce around inside those microscopic tunnels. They lose their kinetic energy, and they are converted into minuscule amounts of heat. The snow is literally swallowing the acoustic energy.
Which creates a landscape that feels like a natural anechoic chamber. Have you ever been in one of those highly engineered soundproof recording studios or scientific testing chambers?
Yes, the ones with the big fiberglass wedges on every surface.
Exactly. You walk in, the heavy bank vault door shuts behind you, and the drop in decibels is so violent that it almost makes you dizzy.
It's disorienting.
Yeah, the vestibular system in your inner ear starts recalibrating because the background static of daily life, the hum of electricity, distant traffic, air moving, it's completely muted.
Mm-hmm.
It is so quiet that you suddenly start hearing the biological reality of your own body. You hear the blood rushing through the capillaries in your ears. You hear the high-pitched whine of your own nervous system.
That physical sensation is what we mean when we talk about a palpable, heavy silence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is a quietude that has a tangible weight pressing against your eardrums. It is not the absence of noise. It is the active presence of stillness.
That's beautifully said.
And because of that massive acoustic dampening, the signal-to-noise ratio of hearing flips just like the visual one did. Every single intentional sound you make becomes a headline event. Absolute stillness magnifies minor microsounds.
Which leads to some incredibly satisfying descriptions. You get the rhythmic, satisfying crunch of compressed powder beneath your boots.
Oh, I can hear that right now.
You hear the sharp, brittle snapping of a frost-laden twig 100 yards away. You can literally hear the physical texture of the snow in that description. But here's where it gets really interesting. When we try to communicate this unique auditory landscape, we start relying heavily on onomatopoeia, which transforms a sterile sentence into an immersive, multisensory experience.
Onomatopoeia being the formation of a word from a sound associated with what is named, like sizzle, pop, or crunch.
But it goes beyond just simple sound effects. Instead of saying something flat and clinical like the wind moved through the trees, we naturally pivot to describing the wind howling through the barren branches.
Right.
Or we describe the massive conifers sighing as a sudden gust dislodges a heavy cascade of snow from their needles.
The word choices there, howling, sighing, are incredibly deliberate, and they tap into deep cognitive psychology.
How so?
By attributing human vocalizations and human emotions to inanimate winter elements, we're engaging in personification. The wind doesn't just displace air, it howls in pain or anger or isolation.
Right, it gives it an emotion.
And the tree doesn't just drop a physical payload of snow, it sighs with relief or exhaustion.
Why does the brain do that? Why do we project human emotion onto a weather pattern?
It's an evolutionary shortcut for empathy.
Really?
Yeah, our brains are hardwired with mirror neurons that respond to human emotional states. By utilizing these personified onomatopoeic words, we bridge the gap between a cold, indifferent meteorological event and the human emotional experience.
Oh, wow.
If I tell you the wind blew at 40 miles per hour, your logical brain processes a data point.
Right.
If I tell you the wind was howling through the bones of the trees, your mirror neurons fire. You subconsciously map the concept of a howl onto your own internal understanding of cold, pain, and isolation. You make the landscape relatable to the listener's own internal state.
It completely bypasses the logical brain and goes straight for the emotional jugular. You literally feel a temperature drop when you imagine a howl versus a breeze.
Exactly.
But as immersive as that auditory landscape is, sound is still processed through a somewhat logical filter. If we want to look at the absolute purest, most unfiltered sensory experience in the human body, we have to bypass the eardrums entirely.
Okay.
We have to talk about the olfactory sense. We have to talk about scent.
Winter smells are incredibly distinct, and they evoke intense, almost overwhelming waves of nostalgia.
Oh, absolutely.
A classic example is stepping outside on a freezing night and catching the acrid yet deeply comforting aroma of wood smoke wafting from a distant chimney.
And this isn't just poetic romanticism either. It is hardwired neuroanatomy.
Correct. The olfactory system is structurally unique among all our senses.
Right.
When you see a light or hear a sound, that sensory data travels to the thalamus, which acts as the brain's central switchboard. The thalamus processes the data, filters it, and then routes it to the appropriate cerebral cortex for conscious thought.
So it's heavily managed.
That's a highly moderated pathway, yeah.
But smell doesn't do that.
No, smell completely ignores the switchboard.
Wow.
Olfactory receptors in your nose have a direct, unmediated neural highway straight to the olfactory bulb, which is intimately connected to the amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, and the hippocampus, which is responsible for episodic memory formation.
Which perfectly explains the phenomenon where smelling a specific, cheap brand of sunscreen can instantly, violently transport you back to a specific beach vacation you took 15 years ago.
Before your conscious brain even registers what the smell is.
Exactly. Or why the smell of pine immediately triggers an emotional cascade of childhood holiday memories. It is unfiltered data hitting your emotional core.
And because of this unique physiological architecture, we face a massive linguistic gap. We actually lack a robust, inherent primary vocabulary for sense compared to the massive, highly categorized vocabulary we have for colors or sounds.
Think about it. If I ask you to describe a color, you have hundreds of highly specific standalone words. Crimson, azure, magenta, chartreuse.
Right.
If I ask you to describe a sound, we just went over howling, sighing, crunching, snapping. But if I ask you to describe a smell, you almost never use a primary word.
Yet so true.
You just say it smells like something else. It smells like strawberries. It smells like wet dog. It smells like smoke.
We are entirely dependent on similes and metaphors. Because of this linguistic gap, to truly convey a scent at a C2 level of mastery, we must describe the smell through the emotion it evokes, rather than just listing its chemical or physical source.
Oh, that's brilliant.
We can't just say it had a smoky smell. The advanced description becomes a rich, resinous aroma that promises the warmth of a hearth.
Promises the warmth of a hearth. That is a brilliant piece of linguistic engineering. It doesn't actually describe the physical odor of combusting carbon and wood fibers.
No, not at all.
It describes the emotional safety, the physical comfort, and the social warmth that the burning wood represents.
It uses the emotional promise as a proxy for the scent. But, that reliance on personal memory creates a massive vulnerability.
Right, because what if the listener doesn't have that emotional anchor? If I grew up in a high-rise apartment building with radiators, or in a tropical climate where we never built fires for warmth, the promise of a hearth means absolutely nothing to me. It's a completely dead metaphor. If we don't share the same nostalgia, the communication completely flatlines.
Which brings us to the ultimate test of linguistic prowess. How do you describe a deeply sensory, highly specific environment to someone who completely lacks the contextual framework to understand it?
This exact scenario is beautifully illustrated by the challenge of bridging the experiential gap. Imagine trying to explain the visceral reality of a freezing, silent snowstorm to a cousin who has lived their entire life in tropical Australia.
Right.
It is an environment that is diametrically opposed to a winter landscape in every conceivable way.
And when you attempt that explanation using standard vocabulary, you run headfirst into what cognitive psychologists call sensory dissonance, which is deeply tied to schema theory.
Okay, break down schema theory for us. What is that?
A schema is basically a mental filing cabinet. It's how our brain organizes and interprets new information based on past experiences.
Got it.
When the cousin in tropical Australia hears the concept of weather falling from the sky, their brain frantically opens the precipitation filing cabinet. But the only files inside are tropical thunderstorms, monsoons, and torrential downpours. They don't have a file for soft, silent, floating ice crystals.
So they aggressively misapply their own schema to your story. When you try to explain the muffled, heavy silence of falling snow, their brain simply rejects it and conceptualizes a torrential, frozen downpour.
Exactly.
They imagine the physical violence and deafening roar of a monsoon, just made of ice. The communication fails entirely because the baseline assumptions are completely misaligned.
So how do you bypass a missing schema? You have to execute a visceral pivot.
A visceral pivot.
Yes. You must abandon visual and auditory descriptions because those rely on shared environmental experiences. Instead, you go straight to the human nervous system. You focus on nociceptors, the sensory receptors for pain, and temperature, because those are universal.
And the example of this visceral pivot from the text is masterful. When trying to explain the sensation of biting sub-zero cold to the tropical cousin, you don't talk about ice or snowbanks or negative degrees on a thermometer.
Right, they wouldn't get it.
You liken it to the aggressive, stinging blast of an industrial air conditioning unit, magnified tenfold, seeping directly into your marrow.
That is sensory translation at its finest.
It really is.
Everyone, even in the hottest regions of tropical Australia, knows the highly specific, artificial feeling of walking into a massively over-air-conditioned grocery store or movie theater while wearing shorts and feeling that sharp, stinging blast of cold air hit their sweaty skin.
Oh, yeah. Everyone knows that feeling.
By taking that tiny shared micro-experience, magnifying the intensity by 10, and using the word marrow to imply that the cold penetrates past the skin and into the skeletal core, you finally bridge the experiential gap.
This raises an important question about the fundamental nature of empathy and communication. It is a fatal error to assume a shared baseline of physical or emotional experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think of this like sensory currency conversion. If you travel to a foreign country and tell a local that a simple cup of coffee in your hometown costs 400 of your local dollars, that number means absolutely nothing to them.
Right, they have no frame of reference.
They have no idea if that implies the coffee is incredibly cheap or obscenely expensive. You cannot just hand someone your raw numerical data. You have to run the exchange rate and convert it into their home currency for them to actually feel the cost.
Sensory currency conversion.
Yeah.
That perfectly encapsulates the process.
Yeah.
You are finding the exact exchange rate between a silent snowstorm and an industrial air conditioner.
And this isn't just about describing the weather. I want you, the listener, to really think about how this applies to your daily friction points. How often are you failing to convert the currency of your own stress?
Oh, that's a great point.
Imagine you come home from work after a brutal day, navigating toxic office politics and passive-aggressive emails. You try to explain your exhaustion to your partner, but you use the currency of your office. You list the specific emails, the meetings, the org chart.
But your partner doesn't work there.
Exactly. They don't have the schema for your office politics, so they don't understand why you are so exhausted, and you end up feeling completely unseen. You failed to run the exchange rate.
What if, instead, you used a visceral pivot? What if you translated the feeling into a shared currency, like the physical sensation of trying to run underwater, or the mental drain of doing complex math in a crowded room?
When you shift from listing the literal facts of your day to translating the visceral weight of your day, you bypass the cognitive disconnect and tap directly into shared empathy. You become an active translator of your own internal landscape.
And having mastered the mechanics of translating the visceral, there's one final, almost intangible element of the winter landscape that we have to address.
Okay.
It is notoriously difficult to capture, but it brings our exploration back to a sweeping visual conclusion. We are talking about the ethereal quality of the winter light.
The lighting in a deep winter landscape is fundamentally altered by astrophysics and geometry.
Because of the tilt of the Earth, right?
Yes, because of the extreme tilt of the Earth's axis during the winter solstice, the sun sits much lower on the horizon for the entire duration of the day.
Its light has to punch through a much thicker layer of the Earth's atmosphere, which scatters the shorter wavelengths.
The visual consequence of that low angle is striking. The landscape is bathed in a pale, diffused luminescence. The shadows aren't short and sharp like in July. They are elongated, skeletal shadows that stretch across the snowfields.
And we understand the mood of that light best through contrast. Think of the harsh, unforgiving, high-contrast glare of the midsummer sun at noon.
It flattens everything out.
Winter light is the opposite. That pale, diffused luminescence lends the entire environment a fragile, almost melancholy beauty.
Fragile, melancholy beauty. It perfectly captures that highly specific feeling of standing outside at 4 p.m. in late January.
Oh, yes.
The light is already precipitously fading, everything feels completely still, and there's this undeniable, heavy sense of an ending lingering in the freezing air.
And observing that fragile light is the final step in synthesizing everything we've discussed. By intentionally engaging with the imposing scale of the wildlife, the heavy, tangible physics of the silence, the unfiltered emotional triggers of the sense, and the melancholy geometry of the light, you complete the transition.
You change how you operate.
You are no longer just letting the environment happen to you. You are actively harvesting it for descriptive power. You're an active curator of language.
But I love that we don't just float away on this cloud of poetic, ethereal observation. The reality of the environment brings us crashing right back down to Earth.
Yes, human physiology always wins.
You can only stand in sub-zero temperatures, waxing poetic about skeletal shadows for so long before your nociceptors aggressively remind you of your own mortality.
It's very true.
Your core temperature drops, you start losing tactile function in your fingers and toes, and survival instincts override your linguistic processing.
Which is the cue to retreat indoors and embrace the concept of hidge.
Let's define hidge for those who might only know it as a trendy hashtag for cozy blankets. It's much deeper than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Hygge is a fundamental concept in Danish culture. Yes, it involves cozy aesthetics, candles, warm drinks, thick sweaters, but at its core, it is a psychological state.
Okay.
It is the intentional creation of intimacy, fellowship, and psychological safety in direct defiance of the harsh, unforgiving darkness and cold of the external winter.
That's beautiful.
It is a warm hearth we were talking about earlier, elevated to a cultural survival mechanism.
So you retreat into that psychological safety, your fingers slowly thaw, but before the memory of the landscape fades, there is one highly practical piece of advice for the active curator. You have to keep a digital notebook or a physical journal immediately at hand.
Cognitive offloading is essential.
Why is that?
The brain is terrible at holding on to the precise C2 level phrasing of a fleeting observation. If you don't document the specific geometry of the light or the exact sound of the wind while the sensory experience is still raw in your hippocampus, it will degrade back into, "It was really cold and pretty," by the next morning.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's summarize the actionable mechanics for you, the listener. The challenge is to step outside your comfort zone, deliberately engage your senses, and push past the baseline adjectives.
Right.
When you encounter awe, notice how your brain tries to shut down and default to big and force it to find the behemoth. Notice the signal-to-noise ratio in your environment. Look for the juxtaposition.
Yes.
And most importantly, practice sensory currency conversion. Stop expecting people to understand your internal weather without translating it into a physical sensation they can feel.
The ultimate takeaway is that language is only valuable when it connects two minds. The exercise of meticulously describing a winter landscape isn't really about the snow.
No, it's bigger than that.
It is a mental gymnasium for critical thinking, empathy, and articulation. The cognitive discipline required to find the perfect, resonant word for a footprint in the ice is the exact same discipline required to find the perfect de-escalating word in a high-stakes business negotiation, or the exact right metaphor in a deeply emotional conversation with a spouse. You are training the engine of your own articulation.
Which brings us to the end of our exploration today. We want to thank you so much for joining us in decoding these mechanics and for taking this journey from passive observation to active curation.
It's been great.
But before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we've unpacked. We've established that a stark, stripped-down environment, a place with zero visual or auditory clutter, acts as a powerful catalyst for advanced language by forcing the brain to hyper-focus on microscopic details.
Right, the blank canvas.
But what happens to our vocabulary and our empathy in an environment of total sensory overload? Think about your daily life. Walking down a neon-lit city street or staring at an endlessly scrolling digital feed filled with auto-playing videos, notifications, and pop-up ads.
The visual noise.
Exactly. If the starkness of winter forces us to be precise, does the digital noise of modern life force our language to become blunt and reactive? Do we lose our descriptive faculties when the blank canvas is taken away and replaced with a relentless wall of noise? And if so, how can we carve out that palpable silence in our everyday communication when the world around us absolutely refuses to be quiet? Keep observing, keep describing, and we will see you next time on The Deep Dive.